Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Chino Does Stuff. It's fantastic to have you here. Today I'm going to be continuing my series on Microsoft Power Apps and looking at saving data from a Microsoft Power App to a SharePoint list. Now I know I've covered this in a previous episode of Chino Does Stuff, but today I'm going to focus more on SharePoint list security and how that works and how we can create a Microsoft Power App that has security around the records and the data that it's saving to the SharePoint list. This is a super important thing. I know I say that after every video or before every video, but this time I really mean it. If you're building enterprise level applications, if you're building applications for the company that you work for, or you're just building applications for really anything. I know just about every application I've ever built, I've needed to put role security inside of my application in one way or another. When you're saving data to a SharePoint list, those challenges seem even more great because you've got this whole other layer of SharePoint that you have to worry about. But believe me, when you've watched this video, you're going to find it's super easy. Let's start with a Power App. And what I've got here is a couple of screens. First screen has a gallery that is connected to a SharePoint list. And the second screen is just a little form that will allow us to enter a record into the SharePoint list. That includes a submit button that has a patch command and also a combo box people picker. So if you're not sure about setting up a combo box to connect to Office 365 users or setting up patch and saving to SharePoint, then I've got a few videos. I've got some videos in this series that should be able to help you out. So just go back and watch some of those and you should be right. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to assume that you are already at the point where you know how to run patch and you understand how this people picker works and how to wire this up into your Office 365 users. So let me just quickly show you the list settings. Now there's a list setting that we need to change. Go into advanced settings. Now in here, by default, this will be set to read all items and create and edit all items. So what we want to set is read items that were created by the user and create items and edit items that were created by the user. So this is really handy because what SharePoint does is when you create, even though you may have some group permissions on this list that say everyone in the entire organization can write list items. Once those list items are written to SharePoint, this will only allow the items that are created by the user to be read, and items that are like any items that a user has created, they have edit access. Everyone else is removed, so no one else in the organization will be able to see or edit those records, with the exception of the system admin, which always has access to all items. Now what we want to do, we want to add an additional step here where our list item is opened up to another user, and that is a part of our business process. So I've set those two items there, and let me just click OK. Here's our SharePoint, here is our Power App, but what we actually need, we need to build a process outside of Power Apps, just like we did with the exporting to PDF. So let me go into Flow, and I'll create a new one from blank. First thing I'll search for is just Power Apps. So I want this flow to be triggered from within Power Apps. And the next step that I want to do is I need to do a HTTP SharePoint request. So let me search for that. And what this is going to do, what this first step is going to do, is I need to make a call to a SharePoint HTTP web service that will that will break the initial inheritance on that list item. It is a post request, so make sure you change that. You're going to enter a custom value, and the value is just going to be my SharePoint site where my list exists. Let me just zoom that in a little so it's easy to see. Now there's special web endpoint for this. I'll just paste that in. Now there's a couple of there's one value here. So this is the get by title. So YouTube demo 1 is my list title. And what I want to send here is the ID for the list item that I have just created. Now I'm going to be getting that from PowerApps. So what we actually need to do, I've skipped a couple of steps here. So what we need to do before this HTTP request, we need to add a couple of actions. So the first action is initialize variable. And this action needs to happen before the HTTP request action. So we're going to initialize a variable. We're going to call this item ID. It is a integer, and for its value, it's going to click see more here. I'm going to ask for it in PowerApps. I know I'm going to need one more. It's going to be initialize variable. And this one is going to be called user email. And this is going to be the email of the user that I'm adding to the permission set on that list item. Ask in PowerApps. Okay. So I've got my two initialized variables now. In here, between the two brackets on list item, let's click on see more. Let me just expand this. Okay, I'm going to select item ID, because I'm going to be passing the item ID from PowerApps to my flow. Next step will be to make another HTTP call. SharePoint HTTP. Now this one is a GET request. The same SharePoint site. And for the URI, we want to add email, open bracket, open quote, and I'm going to use the user email variable that I'm passing from PowerApps, and then close quote. Add a new step. Going to initialize another variable. For this step, I'm going to need to extract what I need from this HTTP request. So basically what I'm doing here is I need to get a unique ID back from SharePoint for that particular user. Now the unique ID is not what you would expect from the user ID. It's not the one that's defined. It's an internal SharePoint ID that's set up behind the scenes in the tenancy. So in here, in my initialize variable, I'm going to call this var requestor ID. Pretty important that you name it right. The type is going to be a string. And the value here this is a little bit more complicated. Just before I do that, I'm going to rename this step to make things a little bit easier. So I'm going to call this get requester ID. So in here, under this initialize variable, I'm going to use an expression. I'm going to use a body expression. And why I renamed that previous step is because you actually need to just type this in. So make sure you get it right. Otherwise, you'll get an error on this step. So body get requester ID. So I'm searching through the value that's returned back from this step. And here I'm looking for searching through the record, and I'm looking for that value. Now you probably don't need, at this stage, you don't really need to understand exactly what's happening here, just as long as you know that this is the way I extract the value that I'm after from this request. So the request will return back a page of data, most likely I'm pretty sure it's JSON data, and this is how we traverse through that to get the ID value back from our HTTP request. So click OK on that. Now the last thing we need to do is send another HTTP request to SharePoint. I'm going to put in my site address. This is another post command. And the URI it's a little bit longer this time. So we've got the URI, and this is my list name here. So you would change this to your list name that you're using, and that will be the same for all of our URL, our web requests to SharePoint. The item, we want to insert the item ID, and in here, under the principal ID, we want to use the var requester ID, comma, roledef ID equals. So this number here is a static number. This will always be the same for every request that you do. If you want to assign contribute permissions. Now, if you're wanting to do if you're wanting to assign read permissions or full access, it's a different number, and I'll post that in the description field for this video, so so that'll be easy. But otherwise, you can just Google it, and you should be able to find out all the different roledef ID numbers that you can use for this. So let's name this workflow. I'm going to name it to SP set list permissions. And save. Okay, that's done. Let's go back to our Power App. Now we need to configure our submit request, but first I need to add that flow to my Power App. So the easiest way I've found to do this is, and again, a little bit clunky, there's probably a better way to do this, but this is the way I do it. I'm just going to add a button. I'm going to highlight the button, on select, action, I'm going to go to flow, and just hit the SP set list permissions, which is the flow that I just created. You can add that in there. So now that's added, but I'm going to copy that out of there because I don't want a random button there. Let's just delete that button out of my Power App. Go to my submit request, and there's a couple of things happening here that might look a little bit unusual. There's one thing in particular. My patch command is wrapped around a clear collect. So what I'm doing here is when the patch runs, it's returning back the record that was, the details of the record that was just saved to SharePoint. Now why I need this is, remember, I'm passing the item ID. I have to pass the item ID to Flow because Flow is just being activated through PowerApps and it doesn't know what item that I'm running. There's no context of what item it's running from. So I need to pass it that context by giving it the unique ID of the record that I'm changing permissions on. So I need to wrap my patch in this clear collect to get that record back from my patch command. So underneath there, I'm just going to add this, and I can see I need two variables, and I know from my workflow, the first variable is the item ID. So what I want to do here is have something prepared before. Okay, so let me just explain that initially. The record, so we're returning a record back from, like I said, we're returning a record back from the patch, but we need to pass a text field to the workflow. So if I just tried to type item ID.id, then this would fail because we'd be trying to send an entire record over, or like potentially a table of records. So what I'm doing here with I'm introducing the first command, which I'm wrapping this in a first command, which will return the first record that's returned back. And I always know this is going to be one record, so this is perfectly valid to do. So so in here for my first parameter, I'm typing first, open bracket, item ID, close bracket, dot ID for the unique ID for that record. Now the second parameter I want to pass to the workflow is my people picker, and I want to pass the selected item for my people picker, and I want to pass the mail value. So, and just end that with a semicolon. Let's play. I'm going to hit the plus. I've got my new request. I'm going to type request. I'm going to say I need a holiday to Spain. Cost $2,000 US. I am very tired. Right, I'm not sure if that would actually pass the request, but hey, and I want to send this request to my approving manager, who's Susie, and let's hit submit. Okay, so I can see there's my request that's gone in. Let's have a look at the flow. Fantastic. We can see flow ran 27 seconds ago and it succeeded. So it's gone through all the steps and all the steps are passed, which means that all the steps are run correctly. If we go to the communication site and I bring up the details for that item and I look at access, can now see that I have access. I'm the owner of that item, and Susie can edit this item, which is precisely how we wanted to set that up. No one else in the organization has access to that list item. So that's it for this video. I sincerely hope you got out of it what you were looking for. Hit like and subscribe if you appreciated what you saw. Heaps of more videos coming up. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.